Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to Sunday school once again. Hopefully everyone's had a happy Thanksgiving. Hopefully all the leftovers are gone, because I'm not a big leftovers person, but it'd be nice to move on to something different. Brother Steve, would you mind opening our class with prayer for us before we begin? And today we're continuing in our quarter of study on miracles in the book of Acts. And we're going to be looking in Acts chapter 12, if y'all want to turn there. Acts 12, we'll start in verse 1 in a minute. And this is to be our last lesson in this quarter, but not our last lesson of miracles in Acts. There's another whole quarter after this one, which we'll start next week. And today's lesson is Peter's deliverance from prison. And one of the things, I thought the same thing when I was studying it. The notes pointed this out. You know, when you think of God delivering somebody from prison, I generally think it would be more like when Samson came up to the gates at Gaza. He just picked the gates up off the post, picked the whole thing up and carried it off. Some big, mighty, great, show of strength or anything like that. In the story of Samson, it was midnight. He took the doors of the city of the gate, the two posts. It says he went away with all of that and put them on his shoulders, carried them up to the top of the hill, and threw them over the side to open the gates. In that case, if most of us were in charge, we would want to see something spectacular similar to that. That's what we would be expecting. But we got to realize, and I think we've seen it in all so far in these lessons, that God is, if one thing is for sure, He's a God of variety. There is no formula for a miracle. God moves how He wants to move, and sometimes it's this way, sometimes it's great, mighty, and spectacular, and explosions and blowing everything up. Sometimes it's a still small voice. You got to be observant to see it in some cases. We've got to realize God does everything well, and God has a reason not just for what He's doing, but for the way He's doing it. Sometimes the way miracles occur have more of an impact than the miracle itself. So we should be able to learn a lot from this particular lesson. One of the things we got to note as we look at it is, though, that it's the second time in this quarter that we have dealt with a disciple of Jesus being freed from prison. We studied one earlier. So we do want to kind of look at the difference, a few things in difference between the two of them. We want to look at the circumstances during these two events and the level of persecution that was evident in this event. And lastly, we're going to look at the value of prayer in this event. So just as an informational item, the word prison, it actually is used in the Bible 70 times, and over 20 of the times you see the word prison are found in the book of Acts. I don't know why I've always been a percentage person. That's 28%. That's nearly a third. So the word prison itself appears quite often. I don't think it's a coincidence. We're studying the Acts of the church, if you will, in the book of Acts, and prison comes up quite often. I don't know whether, we expect things to be all rosy and perfect once you decide to be a Christian, but I think it's maybe far from that. The devil gets active on you when you become a Christian. He doesn't leave you alone and go, oh, I lost that one. No, he gets more active. Prison becomes part of, in this time frame, prison was part of life for the Christian church. I mean, Peter's in prison because he's talking about the Lord. So if you're in Acts chapter 12, verse number 1, again, it was like last week. It's a little lengthy because there's a lot of stuff going on, but we're going to go ahead and read from verse 1 to 19. It says this: Now about that time, Herod the king stretched forth his hands to vex certain of the church, and he killed James the brother of John with the sword. And because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also. Then were the days of unleavened bread. And when he had apprehended him, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people. Peter therefore was kept in prison, but prayer was made without ceasing of the church unto God for him. And when Herod would have brought him forth, the same night Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers and bound with 2 chains, and the keepers before the door kept the prison. And behold, the angel of the Lord came upon him, and a light shined in the prison. And he smote Peter on the side and raised him up, saying, Arise up quickly. And his chains fell off from his hands. And the angel said unto him, Gird thyself and bind on thy sandals. And so he did. And he saith unto him, Cast thy garments upon thee and follow me. And he went out and followed him, and wist not that it was true which was done by the angel, but thought he saw a vision. When they were past the first and the second ward, they came into the iron gate that leadeth into the city, which opened to them of his own accord. And they went out and passed on through one street, and forthwith the angel departed from him. And when Peter was come to himself, he said, Now I know of surety that the Lord hath sent his angels, and has delivered me out of the hand of Herod, and from all the expectation of the people of the Jews. And when he had considered the thing, he came to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose surname was Mark, where many were gathered together praying. And as Peter knocked at the door of the gate, a damsel came to hearken, named Rhoda. And when she knew Peter's voice, she opened not the gate for gladness, but ran in and told how Peter stood before the gate. And they said unto her, Thou art mad. But she constantly affirmed it, that it was even so. Then said they, It is his angel. But Peter continued knocking, and when they had opened the door, they saw him, they were astonished. But he, beckoning unto them with a hand to hold their peace, declared unto them how the Lord had brought him out of the prison. And he said, Go and show these things unto James and to the brethren. And he departed and went into another place. Now, as soon as it was day, there was no small stir among the soldiers what was become of Peter. And when Herod sought for him and found him not, he examined the keepers and commanded that they should be put to death. And he went down from Judea to Caesarea and there abode. So I know it was kind of lengthy to see quite a few things happen in the beginning of this text. One of the things that just stuck out to me was, we think, again, I said it a second ago, we think you come get saved, I know the Lord, now everything's perfect. Well, on the outside, I don't think things were perfect for Peter. I don't think things were perfect for the people that were working with Peter, that were following Peter, I guess, if you want to say. And just realize in some of the lessons just prior to this one, Peter's walking down the street and they're trying to get into his shadows so people can be healed. He's preaching the Lord. He's preached some mighty sermons just in the last few months up to this. And in my mind, I'm thinking how I would think, all right, Lord, I just had a mighty sermon at Pentecost for you. I just had a mighty sermon over here in this town. I just raised this woman from dead. You raised her through me. And now I'm in jail? I mean, we can't let that kind of stuff influence us. One thing I definitely have seen in studying all these miracles of Jesus, miracles in the book of Acts, we look too much at the temporary. We look too much at where we are, and we judge our actions and our responses to things based off of that instead of what God said. God told Peter what he was going to be doing. He told him right before he denied him, right after he denied him, if you love me, do what? Feed my sheep. He told him what he was going to be doing. In prison, guess what? In prison, feed his sheep. Don't look at your circumstances as a hindrance. Look at your circumstances as God's put me here for a reason. Figure out what the reason is, and you're going to be in good shape. And the best way to figure it out is talk to God about your circumstances, not your neighbor, not your friend, not your buddy, not necessarily even the preacher. Talk to God. We don't have to go through somebody to talk to the Lord. You can talk to him anytime you want. You got Peter, he's sitting here. The thing that got me about this too was sort of like even Paul and Silas. He's in prison, and what's he doing? He's sleeping. I mean, to me, he's following Christ's example. Where was Christ in the boat in the middle of the storm? He was sleeping in the back. I also thought, this is all just line you up stuff. I thought it was interesting too, this light shines in the prison and nobody saw it except for Peter. That tells me that people that don't know the Lord can't see what the Lord's doing. You hadn't been born again, you don't see the spiritual realm, you don't realize it. There are too many people that have been born again and don't take the time to look at what they can see. That light's shining. Are we looking for it? Or are we just still wandering around in the darkness? That'll bring us to the first point we want to look at in this lesson is the circumstances where this miracle came. We studied in an earlier lesson following the healing of a lame man at the gate called Beautiful in Acts 3. This is at the introduction. I told you we were going to look at this other deliverance from prison. We had Peter was preaching a message, and it upset the people. And it got them to the point that they laid hands on them and put them in a hold until the next day. So Peter's already been in jail before. So Peter and John were arrested. They were told not to preach in the name of Jesus. By chapter 5, the disciples were thrown into a common prison because of the healing of all who were sick and vexed with unclean spirits. Can you imagine being thrown in prison because you're healing and helping people? Many revealed their faith by laying the afflicted in the path of Peter that they might come in contact with his shadow. I want to contrast that setting. They've been thrown in jail basically for healing and helping people, in contrast to this case. Think about this. Everything that the Lord was doing through Peter and John, the high priests and all they were with him, that was the sect of the Sadducees, they arrested them. All right, so in the first case, who arrested them? The religious, the high priests, the Sadducees. And on that occasion, the Lord freed them and told them to go down to the temple and preach the words of life to the people. We studied that already again, just to kind of review it quick. They're in jail for preaching the word. They get delivered from jail and are told to go preach the word. Sometimes, like I said, we don't put ourselves in that and think about how you'd feel about that. First off, I'm in jail for healing people and preaching the word. Why? And then, okay, you let me out, and then what are you telling me to do? Go right back and do what got me here in the first place. We don't have to understand it all. We just have to do what God told us to do. So all of these great miracles, like in Acts 3, prior to where we're studying today, were causing the church to grow at such a rapid rate that the need arose for the ministry of a deacon. And eventually we read about the first recorded martyr, Stephen, who was stoned to death. All right, so there's Peter and them, they get arrested. That brings a big growth. Then you got Stephen comes on the scene, and we know that ties into Paul eventually. So in Acts 3, the first time they're in jail, the persecution of the Christians came from the religious world. Fast forward to this lesson. He's in jail again. But take note of the circumstances of this jailing. He's not in prison because of the religious. By the time we get to chapter 12, where we just read, he's in jail because of the civil authorities. The civil authorities have joined together with the religious authorities to stop this mighty move. Herod's not a Jew. He doesn't care about the Jews. He ain't even worried about the Jews at all. He's there as a governor. The Romans are there. Actually, the Romans are there as the Jews' protectors, and now they are persecuting Christians just like the religious. So just like the Herod that took the head of John the Baptist prior to this, just because his daughter asked him to, this Herod, the one we're reading in this text, stretched forth his hand to vex individuals of the church. He killed James with a sword. And the process and severity of the persecution was clearly getting worse. Again, look at the context we're in here now. The church is born at Pentecost. Peter's part of that. Preaches the message. He's healing people. He's in jail because of the religious. He's delivered from jail. He goes right back to preaching what he is again. In my mind, I'm seeing the devil's mindset in this. All right, I can't get him with the religious groups. We're going to have to call in some civil authorities to help us out with this. Look, the devil's at work. He's trying to stamp this out, whatever it takes. So this steady downhill decline is similar to the road of sin, where things continually deteriorate. We don't mind celebrating Pentecost and the birth of the church, but do we look at what happened right after it? It starts with religious persecution, spills over into civil persecution. Pretty soon, it's total persecution. Sin takes us down that same path. Where would any of us be if it wasn't for the Lord? So this is the atmosphere where we have the text of today's lesson with Peter being in jail. Herod saw that the vexing of the saints and the killing of James pleased the Jews. So he had Peter thrown into prison with plans to put him to death. He had to wait till the feast days were over so to not aggravate the Jews. So the disciples were getting a firsthand experience of what Jesus was trying to tell them when he was here. It's in Matthew 10. Here's what Jesus told them before the crucifixion. Matthew 10:16. Behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves, but be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves. But beware of men, for they will deliver you up in the councils, and they will scourge you in their synagogues. And ye shall be brought before governors and kings for my sake, for a testimony against them and the Gentiles. But when they deliver you up, take not thought how or what ye shall speak, for it shall be given you in the same hour what ye shall speak. Again, he asked him some questions in Matthew 20. He said this, 20:22. Are ye able to drink of the cup that I shall drink of, and to be baptized within the baptism that I am baptized? Look at the context again. We find ourselves, this is a significant escalation on the world scale against Christianity. We just read it as Peter's put in prison because Herod didn't like him, but it's more than that. In my mind, I think about some of the events unfolding today. We read the events and say, oh, that's nice, or that's coincidence, or wow, look at that. Ooh, I never thought about that. Do we really see what's happening on the grand scale of things? We can. You can see with the eyes of Christ if you want to. Any Christian can. He's even told us that. He'll open your eyes to all of it. There's a lot of stuff going on in our world right now. Open up any news app on your phone and look and see. There's all kind of stuff. Don't get caught up so much in that as what it means, what it implies, what goes with it. In this case, Herod taking Peter and killing James and taking Peter is a huge escalation against Christianity. I submit that kind of stuff's going on right now. Right now, we're meeting here today. Nobody's going to come in here and try to take us captive or shoot us or anything like that. But it's escalating quickly. That might not be too far away. Prison might be just around the corner if we're looking. Again, surely had they known when he talked to them in Matthew 10 and Matthew 20, surely if they'd have known they were headed for, they probably wouldn't have answered so quickly. He said, are ye able to drink of the cup that I shall drink of? They answered right away, we're able. I think it's interesting. They answered right away, we're able. The zeal, the gusto was there, yet a few weeks later, Peter's denying he even knew Christ. And then a few weeks after that is the day of Pentecost. Now it seems like a roller coaster to me, and the circumstances are, this is just me, I think the devil likes to get us on that roller coaster because then it gets you all confused. And when you get confused, you don't make intelligent choices. We got to get off the roller coaster of the temporary and get on the straight path of what did God say? What did he say? That's the focus. Most people in the church world today have forgotten the extent of the call of God upon their lives. I know lots of people, I heard them with my own voice, came to an altar and said, Lord, I'll do whatever you want. And you can't get them out the bar room right now. All right? They forgot. They heard the call, they just didn't follow through with it. So we see here that the first preachers of the gospel were so assured of its truth that they became willing to seal it with their own blood. Again, confirming the reality that could be found in the salvation of one soul. James has already been killed. Peter's up next, if you will, to be killed. But he's still standing where he's supposed to be. Mark 8, Jesus taught this. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, but whosoever shall lose his life for my sake in the gospels, the same shall save it. It's just me again. I think Peter's sitting in that jail cell thinking about those words right there. Okay, Lord, if I need to die, I'm ready to die, if that's what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't think he was worried about it at all. I don't think he was, and again, I know you're going to be worried, but I don't think he was like all freaking out about it like most of us probably would be. I would not want to be in jail knowing Herod was going to kill me tomorrow morning. All right, but at the same time, we can find comfort in the Lord even in those situations. To me, that's part of the miracle. Again, this is why Paul could write to the church and tell us that nothing, absolutely nothing can separate you from the love of God. Nothing. Not even prison, not even being killed with the sword. None of that stuff. The circumstances here. Peter's in prison, not just from the religious, but now the civil authorities have joined in. It's getting worse. He sees that, But what's he doing? He's sleeping. A quintillion of soldiers. There were 16 guards on him, is basically what 4 quintillions. That's 4 sets of 4. So he seems in the natural sense to be in a bad spot. But in a spiritual sense, I really think he's at ease. He's where he thinks he's where he knows he needs to be. That'll bring us again to look a little further at this level of persecution. That's our second point. So we can see the persecution getting worse. I submit that's true today too. And as believers, we know from experience that the nature of sin will continue to drag a person further down into that bottomless pit. So we should be careful not to give any extra occasion to the devil, which just opens up the door for him to tempt us even more. We can also see that those who become bloodthirsty, the Jewish religious leaders, the civil leaders this time, they're not satisfied with a little bit. They're just like the sin they're in. It has to have more. There has to be more to satisfy it. He kills James. He says, ooh, the Jews like that. Let me kill somebody else. So he goes and finds Peter. He's not happy just with where he was. So we got to take heed at the beginning of sin. We need to see the danger of trying to serve this world and please men. Early in the ministry of Jesus, he taught them this in Matthew 6:24. No man can serve 2 masters, for he will either hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. In Peter and John's defense, when the pressure and the heat was on, this was their reply. Acts chapter 4, again, what Christ told them in Matthew 6, what Christ told them in Matthew 10 and Matthew 20. They hear all that. This was their response in Acts 4, verse 19. But Peter and John answered him and said unto them, whether it be right in the sight of God to hearken unto you more than unto God, judge ye. For we cannot but speak the things which we have seen and heard. So here we see, and should be able to see, the thermostat of the relationship between religion authorities, civil authorities, Christianity, that the heat has been turned up a lot. Notice again, even the power structure itself. Notice how it begins to deal with and expose the pride of leadership, even with the things that they do. Those who make it their goal to please men are always going to be easy prey for the devil. I submit the devil's using, even today, the religious world and the civil authorities world to persecute Christianity. He's using everything within his power, and I think the further time goes on, the closer we get to the Lord's return, the more that level of persecution is going to rise. I'm not saying that to be, oh my gosh, it's so scary. What are we going to do? I already know what we're going to do. We're going to follow the Lord and do what he told us to do. It's not that kind of thing, but we need to see it for what it is. I know a lot of friends of mine, they come to church, they get saved, and it's great. And the first little bit of struggle, they abandon that and go right back to what they were doing. You can't do that. You got to stay focused. Again, it's not about your circumstances. It's about what the Lord said. We come into look, the world's a bad place for everybody. Christians, non-Christians, y'all have heard it before. It rains on the just and the unjust. Look, our government puts things in actions by the decisions of those people running it all the time. Don't be fooled. They affect you, me. They affect the sinner. They affect the guy in the bar room, the guy in the church, all of them. All of that has some effect. It's how we respond to it. That'll bring us to the third point, and more or less the final point of this miracle. It would appear that we would be spiritually correct in seeing that there are different kinds of prayer, if you will. Look, there's formal praying, there's general praying, there's sincere praying, there's fasting and praying. You can read about different versions of all that kind of stuff. In this text, it says that it was prayer without ceasing, which we'd have to say, obviously, that's sincere. If you're continually praying moment by moment by moment, the church was praying for Peter in that manner. It was sincere. So again, this would fall under the category of not just general praying, because it was particular. It was praying without ceasing for Peter. There was a reason for it. So they no doubt had already learned the importance of the life and ministry of Peter for the church. They knew they needed him. They knew they needed Peter as part of the ministry of God, and that God had sent Peter to them for this ministry. They knew what they needed. They see their circumstances. Where did they turn in their circumstances? They turned to prayer. They began to pray for Peter. So again, we not only got to see that as being true, but we've got to learn to appreciate the God-given gifts which He's specifically given the church. Look, your pastor, God gave the church a pastor. You got to pray for him. Don't just let him do it all. God gave us other Christians. We're in the same building all the time. We got to pray for each other. So prayers and tears are the arms of the church. That's how we fight against all this. This is true not only for our fight against the enemy, but it also is true of our fight for our friends. Prayer, that's two sides of prayer. We don't look at it a whole lot. Everybody likes to pray against the devil, but maybe not quite as much praying for fellow Christians. I know I've heard Brother Marty say it. I heard Brother Harden say it quite a few times too. It's hard to gossip about somebody you're praying for every day. We got to see both sides of that. It would appear in this context that the church world in general has forgotten the biblical responsibility of praying for other Christians. Some have even said that the church is the only organization in the world that shoots its own wounded and kicks those within its ranks that have fallen. Look, I grew up the preacher's kid. I'm going to tell you, I've seen plenty of that. I've seen more than that I want to see. There's still plenty of that going on. In general, the religious world shoots its own wounded. We're to be our brother's keeper, and we have a responsibility, a scriptural responsibility toward each other. Galatians 6:2 says this way, "But bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ." So all of us are going to stand accountable for how we treat those within the family of God. Not my forehead no more, the whole family of God. Our text gives a great example of what the true church is going to be like. Again, the context of this miracle again. Herod made a mistake right here because he had Peter. The mistake he made was he didn't execute him on the spot. He gave the church time to pray. I don't think that's an accident either. I think that's the Lord moving on Herod and moving on the church. They had time to pray. So they were right, the church, in seeing the need for Peter to continue to help them and work with them. So God was not through with Peter either. So if we can imagine after the death of James, how serious the praying of the church must have become. Again, it doesn't say all this, but I don't see how it can be any other way. Herod killed James. What do you think the church did? They started praying. Herod took Peter. You think the heat of prayer jumped up considerably then? They're praying for James. It looks like it's getting worse. Stay praying. Again, quit looking at the circumstances. Pray about the circumstances. Again, think about how the church prayer must have increased when the persecution of one of their main leaders was taking place after just executing the other one. We got to take into consideration that through the death and suffering of the members of the body of Christ, often the interest of the kingdom of God is still being served. This is just me again. Y'all might disagree. I don't know how I can see it any different. We're called here to serve the Lord and to bring attention to the Lord. If my death is necessary to save somebody else, this is temporary. Where am I going if I die? Where are you going if you die? You're going to heaven. We got to start seeing it like that. We can't be nonchalant with that approach at the same time. This is something we have to pray through and make it our business to see God has His way. Even when we pray, we do that all the time. I remember hearing an evangelist when I was a little kid, and he was talking about prayer. He goes, y'all get up in the morning and say, Lord, help me have a good day. Lord, bless me for all the food you gave me. Lord, give me this. Lord, give me that. How many people, why people don't get up and say, Lord, what do you want me to do? That's praying. I want to look at a couple of other aspects of prayer. In this case particular, in this passage of Scripture we're studying, and in general. Number one, let's look at the timing of this prayer. It was the night before Herod was going to put Peter to death, when the devil and his helpers decided it was time for death to come to any part of the church. God is going to decide whether he's going to allow that to happen or not. In James's case, God decided to allow that to happen. In Peter's case, God decided not to allow that to happen. I'll submit that both of those are equally just decisions, because our God always does right. So when things are brought to their last extreme, that's when people want to look to God. We should be looking to God before that, way before that. Although that timing does portray the opportunity to help through prayer. So we've got to learn to trust God's timing. Prayer, asking God what to do, when to do, where to do, all will keep us in his timing. Second thing we got to look at is when the answers come. Again, prayer in general and in this place. The fact that somebody who's bound with change and his past experience had brought them to doubling up of the guards, if you will. Keep in mind, there are 16 soldiers watching Peter. That didn't keep him from sleeping. That didn't stop God from bringing deliverance. God's not worried about 16 Roman soldiers. He's not worried about 10,000 Roman soldiers. Remember, Jesus was asleep in the storm in the boat. Peter's asleep one step away from death. So God can give us sleep even when we're not expecting deliverance. I'm not faulting Peter in this sense for that. I don't know whether Peter expected deliverance or not. Here's what I know. He was comfortable where God put him. So bars and guards, they may have been able to keep his friends from him, but they could not stop those friends' prayers. They could not stop the angel of God from coming to him. When that answer comes, know this: wherever the people of God are, whatever they're doing, whatever the circumstances, that cannot keep us from having an opening heavenward. And nothing can stop us from talking to the Lord, period. You can't stop anybody from talking to God. Do we really see it like that? That'll bring us to the third thing about prayer here, is direction will follow. It's not abnormal for true believers of God to not know where they're going, but it can never be said of us that we do not know who we're following. That's worth repeating again. It's not very abnormal for a Christian not to know where they're going. Abraham left everything. He didn't have no clue where he was going. But it can never be said that we don't know who we're following. I've heard Brother Hardin say it a lot of times too. You keep following Jesus long enough, you're going to be where Jesus is. I don't know where I'm going, but I can see Christ and I know where he's going, so I'm going with him. Basically, that's what Peter's been doing ever since the denial, if you will. Peter was quickly awakened. He was given instructions, delivered out of prison, and it all took place so quickly that he thought it was a vision. Again, Abraham got his bag, got his family, became a pilgrim and a stranger, didn't have any idea where he was going. But clearly there was no doubt that Abraham was looking for a city whose builder and maker was God. In Peter's case, in this text, he might have thought this news was just too good to be true. It even says in the text, he ain't even so sure it's not a vision. Till he's out on the street and the angel disappears and he's like, oh, wait, I am out in the middle of the street. When an invisible power blinds the eyes of the guards and we move out from between them, remember, he's shackled and handcuffed to these guards. And then there were guards at the gates opened by themselves. Maybe we finally can get the message the Lord is moving miraculously. No doubt we're seeing the fulfillment of the prophet Isaiah of the light to the Gentiles. Here's what Isaiah said in chapter 42. To open the blind eyes, to bring out the prisoners from the prison, and them that sit in darkness out of the prison house. Well, this is definitely here, because Peter's in prison for preaching to the Gentiles. He's trying to open the eyes of the Gentiles to the Lord. He's been cast into prison, and the Lord has delivered him from the darkness of the prison. I don't know how you can get more exact of a fulfilling of what Isaiah said than this situation. Directions. Peter's in the prison. The angel appears and gives him directions. When we're praying, look at the timing of the prayer, look at when that answer comes, and follow the directions. We don't have to dwell here a whole long time, but miracles are not to be expected when an ordinary means can be used. However, we do need to recognize miracles when they do happen. We can't write a miracle off as some wild coincidence or by chance. I know I like to read novels on different kind of genres and things, and you'll see that phrase in books all the time. By chance, this happened. Just by coincidence, such and such happened. They write it like that in a book. In your life, there's no by chance. There's no just all of a sudden such and such happened. There's God moved and this happened. Again, we're seeing in this text not just a miracle, but a string of miracles. Once Peter was completely clear of the danger, he was again left to do what was right. His mission's still the same. When we don't know what to do, go to the people you know have been praying for you. In Acts 12:11, and Peter, when he was come to himself, he said, now I know of surety that the Lord has sent his angel and delivered me out of the hand of Herod. And what did he do? He went to the people that were praying for him. So look in context again, things about prayer here. The timing, when the answer comes, following the directions. And also we need to realize that miracles let you know who your friends really are. And prayer alerts you to that. If you and I want to know who your friends are, ask the Lord. He'll tell you. It is possible that we could knock on the door and walk into the church and hear our own name being called out to God. That would be awesome. I know when I was struggling with where to go to church years and years ago, we bounced around from this one to that one. I remember I was like, all right, I'm going over there to Bethel, and Lord, I need to know it's going to be okay for me to go to Bethel. I need to know if I go there that people are not going to go, you did this and this and that, man, I don't want to hear all that. I need a sign. I came in, I waited till like 6:15. I didn't want to be at the beginning because I didn't want to talk to nobody. I went and sat on that back row. Well, it's not there anymore because the booth is there, but there was a back row back there. I sat right there in the row and I'm like, all right, am I going to be accepted here or what? And it's like I'm thinking that, and Brother Harden calls on me to pray over the offering while I'm thinking that. And I'm like, okay, he don't call on just nobody to pray over the offering. I guess this is a good sign. So I said the prayer, and that was it. So, again, you know who your friends are, the Lord will show you. Again, a real friend's not going to be putting you down. A real friend is trying to get the best out of you. Even when if you're in prison, he's going to be praying for you to get out of prison, not talking about why you're in prison, not making fun of you, not trying to gossip with everybody else. Well, what could he have done? I thought he was a good guy. Now he's in prison. They didn't think that about Peter. They prayed for Peter. Fifth thing is prayer can expose how much faith you have. A lot of times we hear people say things like this. I was praying and you won't believe what happened. Anybody besides me ever heard somebody say that? That tells me a couple things. There's two choices here. Either something happened and they didn't think it actually was, or something happened that was far above and beyond what they were praying about. I'm hoping that it was something far above and beyond what you were praying about. But even then, that shows that we're trying to limit the Lord in our prayer. So I prayed and something that I wasn't expecting happened. Well, what were you praying for? Again, this shouldn't come to surprise to us, for he told us it would. When they saw Peter, they were astonished. Can you imagine the very thing you're praying for at this prayer meeting is standing at the door. He knocks on the door. The girl comes to the door, hears his voice, doesn't even let him in, takes off running back in and talking to everybody about he's here. And then they're all like, oh no, you must be imagining things. Well, what were you praying for? I'm praying for Peter to be here. God's already answered the prayer, and I don't see it because I'm still praying for Peter to be brought out of jail, and he's already brought it. We can't allow our prayer life to be about that. Look, pray to God like you mean it. Pray to God that it's going to happen. Better yet, pray to God like it already's happened. My Bible says that once you say the prayer, he's already heard it, it's already answered. We let our circumstances get in the way again and cloud what we see. So in conclusion, I can't leave this lesson without noting that God did address Herod. Herod, he killed James, he imprisoned Peter. He didn't just walk off free. The fate of the man who was directly responsible for vexing the church, for killing James, imprisoning Peter, and all kind of other mischief, his end results described right after our text. We just read in Acts 12. This is like a couple of verses later, Acts 12:21. And upon a set day, Herod, arrayed in royal apparel, sat upon his throne and made an oration unto them. And the people gave shouts, saying, It is the voice of God, and not of man. And immediately the angel of the Lord smote him, because he gave not God the glory. And he was eaten of worms and gave up the ghost. Don't think that God's not seeing the persecution. Don't think that God doesn't see the people working against him. Don't think that people aren't going to have a day of reckoning sometime or another. We should never underestimate not only what God can do, but what God will do. Be assured, in the end, righteousness will always prevail. Be assured, in your circumstances, there is safety in God's pavilion. There's safety there. The fact is, there is no safe place outside of the will of God. In our lesson today, the safest place for Peter to be at that time was in prison. It was his presence there which caused the church to intercede in prayer. Peter was in prison. This is me. I believe Peter was in prison to waken up the church. You do have some power in prayer. You can call upon the Lord. The Lord does hear your prayer. He will help. Peter had an encounter with an angel of the Lord because he was in prison. Trusting God will always increase your faith. Trusting God will always confirm His word. Trusting God will always open up your spiritual understanding. Trusting God will always enhance your relationship with the Lord. Trusting God will convince you that His way is the best way. So we look at this miracle. I think there's a whole lot of stuff packed in there. Really, in this lesson, I don't think we quite scratched the surface on all of it. But there are a lot of things we've got to think about in these next few days. Thank you all very much. I look forward to seeing you all next week.